Good morning. Thank you for having me today.
You and I were talking a bit off air, and you told me about your history. And truly, with the climate now and the war in the Middle East and what went on in Venezuela just a few months ago, you're really perfectly set up to talk about all of these topics. Tell people who aren't familiar with you briefly about your background.
Yeah, so I just retired in 2025 after 22 years on active duty in the Marine Corps. I spent a majority of that time as a lawyer focused on international and operational law. That included 5 deployments to the Middle East. 4 were on the ground between Iraq and Kuwait. And then I did 1 deployment on aboard a Marine Expeditionary Unit. And you probably have heard that in the news recently. There are 2 Marine Expeditionary Units in and around the Strait of Hormuz right now. And then over the course of that, my time on active duty, I had spent some time at the Pentagon as well as U.S. Southern Command. So I was very familiar with the operations in Venezuela, and I've spent a disproportionate amount of time in the Middle East and thinking about the Middle East.
Now, let's talk about the Middle East, because President Trump yesterday addressed the nation. A lot of folks in the mainstream news media, a lot of people on the left trying to criticize the president, saying that somehow we aren't winning. By all accounts, and you're the pro here, it does appear that we are winning this. President Trump said another couple of weeks we should be out of there. What are your thoughts on the president's argument last night to the American people and really, quite frankly, to the world?
Well, I thought he did what he needed to do. And that was, he did not declare victory. He did not say that we're going to end this immediately. I think he made the case that said we needed to do this exactly when and how we've done this, and that we need to continue and finish the job. Whenever we politicize our foreign policy and national security, we run the risk of undermining our own efforts. And I see a lot of folks on the left, some Democrat leadership, almost cheering against U.S. troops on the troops in the region and U.S. efforts in the region. So I find that inappropriate, and I don't see it helpful whatsoever. So the case that he made last night, I thought did a very good job of framing this from a tactical, operational, and strategic goals standpoint. And I think tactically and operationally, this has been nearly flawless. Anytime you conduct combat operations, you're going to have U.S. personnel that are going to be put in harm's way. And we've seen that. And it's always a tragic loss, but that's a part of being on active duty and serving. But I think you saw the last piece of this, and that what are our strategic goals? And I think we're going to achieve those in the coming weeks. And that is the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz with assistance from the international community.
All right, let's talk about that. It seems that President Trump is really trying to get our allies, and they should be more involved in this fight since they are the ones who benefit from the oil in this part of the world. As the president's made the argument, we don't use much oil that passes through the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump said, look, I've got some solutions for you. Either buy oil from the United States or you get down there and you start getting these tankers moving. What is the holdup? Obviously, you've got Iran, who's trying to clutch at anything they can to tie this thing up or to inflict pain on the rest of the world. But what do you foresee happening here? Do our allies come into this area and start helping us in this fight?
I think they have to. This is really Iran's only leverage, and this is really how they've held the entire region and the global economy at risk. They've controlled this choke point for the last 47 years. Now, we don't directly benefit from the oil and petroleum products, including liquefied natural gas that comes through the strait, but the global economy does, and that does affect the U.S. economy. But we have had a disproportionate impact, or I should say disproportionate responsibility to ensure the global economy. And I'll leave it at that. I think folks need to ensure that the safe passage of their vessels is guaranteed. And I think that they need to take on the responsibility of some of the things they need directly from the Strait of Hormuz. So we have an interest, of course, in providing the global economy with what it needs. But I think our allies and our regional partners need to step up and take on the role and responsibility that we have fulfilled almost exclusively for the last 40 years.
And you think they'll do that? You think you'll see some movement in the next couple of weeks? We've heard Mark Rutte from NATO will be at the White House next week. I think they're all a little spooked that President Trump is saying, you know what, we're going to get out of NATO if there's not a true sense of our allies coming together to support us too.
And I was shocked to see that we had NATO partners that were not allowing U.S. aircraft to fly over. We're not allowing basing. I mean, that is a simple relationship that we have with NATO partners. The fact that they benefit from a lot of the security and the prosperity we've created by maintaining the Strait of Hormuz as we have, upholding UNCLOS and the international transit that occurs in that region. I was shocked to see that our NATO partners didn't step up earlier. And I think they have to recognize that we can no longer subsidize their wealth and prosperity. They have to take their interest in mind, and they have to assist us in this mission that we have taken on almost exclusively for the last 40 years.
Yeah, it's surprising to me, too. Look, it doesn't surprise me that they don't want to step up. It doesn't surprise me that they were too afraid to get involved and do the right thing, what needed to be done for the last 47 years. Somebody had to do it. But what does surprise me, as you mentioned, Chris, is that bases that we paid for, our military troops are there helping to protect their space, and we're not allowed to land. We're not allowed to use their resources. I mean, that truly is insulting.
It was insulting, and unfortunately, I think it's unnecessary risk. I think we've all viewed the Middle East, and particularly the Strait of Hormuz, as a choke point that was not necessary. You know, I've transited through the Strait of Hormuz, and I would advise Marines that we would have to absorb a level of risk in that region that we wouldn't accept anywhere else in the world. And that somehow, now that we're dealing with this, that we're responding to repeated attacks by Iran, Iranian proxies, and the destabilizing effect that they've had on the region, not just to U.S. forces and U.S. interests, but the region as a whole. And then now for the world to say that we didn't choose this and we're not going to participate, though they benefit from all of the work we've done in that region, I think that was unfortunate. And I think calling into question the status of NATO is appropriate as a way of renegotiating expectations, to say, look, if we're going to have this agreement, then there has to be a give and a take. We can't simply subsidize your security and simply subsidize your economy.
Now, you have all of the experience from being deployed in this area and certainly learning how we might go into Iran strategically. Is your inclination that we will see so-called boots on the ground, a ground invasion? I think probably more likely special forces that may be going in on some targeted operations. What do you think that looks like over the next few weeks?
You know, I could see certainly Marines taking one or two of those islands within the Strait of Hormuz. What they would be doing would be protecting shipping from a land-based fixture. Now, there is a lot of risk with that. You know, this is what Marines do, but these islands have been in the possession of Iran for the last 47 years, and they've been preparing for just this very scenario. So taking those islands would be difficult, holding those islands would be difficult, and they would be under constant threat of attack. Now, I have the utmost confidence in our military planners and the Marines in the region to execute that mission, but I could see Marines seizing those islands to ensure that there was safe transit for commercial shipping. And I could also see Special Operations Forces doing very targeted operations, whether it was to verify the complete destruction of the nuclear program or any other singular targets. But I do not see a sustained deployment of U.S. forces in mainland Iran.
Yeah, I don't think that's something that's on President Trump's bingo card as well. He's always been against a long deployment for our military. All right, in our final moment here, Chris Burnett is with us, retired Marine candidate for Congress in Maryland's 6th Congressional District. Give us an update on our current relationship with Venezuela, because a lot of people are questioning whether or not that alliance, which seems to be going well, can be trusted.
Well, whether it can be trusted or not, it has improved dramatically. You know, I had spent several years at U.S. Southern Command between 2017 and 2019. And one of the things that we were doing while I was there was we had to develop a targeting list. We were identifying military targets in case we had to do any evacuation of U.S. personnel or embassy personnel. So we started to build out a targeting list, so as how we would do ingress and egress if we had to do an evacuation. And what we found is that they had significant air capability and they had significant foreign influence, and that was both from Russia and China. And we were watching
better place than we were before, Chris. That's the bottom line, is we are in a much better place than we were before.
Yes. 100% much better place. And then the planning we had done set the conditions for that most recent effective operation. And I feel
we
like
appreciate your service. We're up